Hello, I'm Adam Campbell. Welcome to the Leading Sustainable Success podcast, brought to you by Telos Partners. In this podcast series, we explore key themes that help leaders to create and sustain success in their organisation. In this episode, I'm joined by colleague Jo Booysen to explore key themes relating to organisational culture. Jo, welcome to the Leading Sustainable Success podcast, and great to have you on today. We're going to be talking about culture, but for those people who are meeting or hearing from you for the first time, perhaps you could start by giving us a bit of background about yourself.
Thank you, Adam, for letting me be part of this. I am Jo Booysen. I have been a partner consultant at Telos for 7 years, but my relationship with Telos stretches a few more decades
longer
back,
than that, yeah.
And that includes founding the business in South Africa.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, we're going to be talking on one of your favourite subjects, really, about culture, and a bit more of that in a moment. But and I've always enjoyed working with you on things like that.
Likewise.
Over those years. One of the questions I'm asking everybody who comes on this podcast is leading sustainable success. What does that mean to you?
At an individual level, it means seeking to balance, never quite getting it, but seeking to balance multiple needs and dimensions over time, in relation to identity. So that, meaning, connection, managing resources like income, and well-being, so that we can thrive. So that's at an individual level, and no surprises, if I was to transfer that to an organisational level, it's the same. But it requires more shared ownership and accountability and understanding, probably in the other order, understanding and ownership to be able to scale it for a business or an organisation that's not for profit, to scale and Excellent. To have the impact it was designed to have.
Excellent. Okay, so and today, as I said, we're zooming in on that thing around kind of culture, the culture element of it, and I'm pretty sure as the conversation unfolds, we'll make links to it. Culture is not just that soft and fluffy thing, but there's so much out there that's spoken about culture. Eat strategy for breakfast, apparently. But what's your take on culture, and how do you see it kind of contributing to organisational sustainable success?
So I disclose my bias up front. So as long as I've been working, I have always had always gravitated towards the people elements of the business. And I come from the premise of the quality of a relationship, of working relationships across multiple stakeholders in an organisation will either support performance or get in the way. And so you mentioned Peter Drucker's quote, and only last week both of us were in a conversation where the client proudly disclosed this quote. And I'm a massive believer in it. I think if you've got people in your business, it's a strategic imperative for all those dimensions of sustainable success that we spoke of. If you're wanting to manage all of those dimensions, and you're wanting to have an impact in the market that's different to your competitors, then you have to engage with this part of your business. I drank the Telos soda a long time ago. I do believe that a business is a product of its relationships, not the sum of its transactions.
Yeah, as you was talking about, that was a really interesting lens for me on culture. Is it, it's not the posters on the walls, it's not the statements what you say, but it is the sum of all of those interactions between people and the relationships.
The language plays a role. You have to have some shared language. So we often gravitate towards things like purpose, mission, values, behaviours, if you've worked with Telos, and they really play a really important role in building a shared sense of language. But it is, if you're relying on that, it's only going to get you so far. So you're looking to, and this is why I don't tend to go out to market selling culture. You have to understand how the culture is impacting on all the other dimensions of the business, because it is either an enabler or it's a barrier.
Yeah, excellent. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a bit more detail, I think, Jo, in terms of culture is, you know, where you are seeing organisations finding an enabler or a barrier. But typically when working with clients and kind of they've made that connection that you've talked about, you know, we if we're going to really improve the performance of this business, we need to do something about our culture as part of the kind of plan that we have, or the actions that we're taking. How are you typically working with organisations around the topic of culture? What sorts of things are they asking you to help with or do?
So let me try and give you some generic arenas of how we attach culture to the commercial elements of a business, and then I'll give you some examples without disclosing names, because there'll be live ones rather than maybe a couple of historical ones, my favorite historical ones. So clients who get it or are trying to get it, this power of culture, will be aware of the fact that they know they need to harness it for performance in some way. So they've got a strategy, but it's not landing, or they're about to define a new strategy, but they don't want to be competing with the culture. Sometimes it's around talent, because this is probably the easiest, most direct link, is if your culture is healthy, people want to work with you.
Yep.
If your culture is not, you won't get the best talent.
Yeah.
They will leave, or they just won't arrive. Then sometimes it's their clients are responding to symptoms, risks, whether that's strategic. Well, we talked a bit about strategic already. Operational, conduct risk. Like if you're a big organization with teams that are very remote, you can't control them. So how do you influence their decisions? How do you influence the tone in which they're interacting with stakeholders? That stuff. Big one at the moment is around psychological safety. So people are like hooked onto this lingo, and they're wanting to stay they want to kind of keep up with the lingo. They're feeling some kind of internal or external pressure around that, so they're wanting to know how to enhance that, because you're trying to understand the latency, the potential in the business. Like, what are we missing out on because people don't feel safe enough, or there's questions of trust around the place, right? And that might have been caused by an incident that hit the news, or has taken up a lot of noise in the corridors or on Teams chats. And then the really mature ones will have experienced something positive in cultural interventions before, and they know that there's a competitive advantage, and they will lead with that. Not often, but we do have clients like that.
It almost feels like an emerging Maslow hierarchy of needs around culture in somewhere there, isn't it?
Yeah,
self-actualization.
Next time, take two, we'll do an order.
But you know, I'm picking up things there: talent, reputation, risk, influence, potential, performance, competitive advantage. So lots of reasons why someone might be looking at and working on culture. And
I said I'd give you a couple of live examples. So at the moment, because I think that all sounds wonderful and textbook, but actually, how does it look when you're having a conversation with a client? Okay, so we have many clients that are going through acquisitions or mergers, and they're frightened about losing their identity, or they are wanting to lead, they're wanting to make sure that their identity comes on top, or better still, they're trying to work out, how do you get the best of both?
Yeah.
How do you really honor the theory of merging in reality?
Okay. Yeah.
You've got current conversations. There's a couple around, oh, I really don't like this in our culture, and I really don't know how to deal with it, but I know I need to deal with it because it's destructive. So how do you build the case with the critical stakeholders to be able to get some momentum and do something?
Yeah.
And that kind of comes in a couple of guises at the moment. We've got a public sector organisation that has people in that senior team that get it. They understand the power of culture, but they're having to work with far more this is not anti-technical, but they're working with exec who are perceived to be more transactional, haven't experienced positive culture interventions, and are driving. It's important to drive strategy and rational processes, but they're driving it above and beyond, like overlooking that they need to bring people along, and that they've got people in their business who've done a really good job under all sorts of constraints. And how do we scale those good examples? We can't just do it with a vision and a strategy plan.
No. Well, and as you're talking, I remind you of conversations we've had on this before about the kind of almost that harder stuff, the harder strategy plan, process stuff and culture stuff, almost sitting hand in glove.
Yeah.
You can't really do one without the other. You can't do culture work on its own without without strategy leads to no real change, and the same is true the other way around.
And we have a client we've worked with for more than a decade, not for profit in the health sector, and they are daily talking about how they need to make some hard strategic decisions, but they are backing it up that it's aligned culturally, so that they're building that trust with their board. And they're getting the license to make some very hard decisions. But that's an example of where, because they're so clear on their cultural expectations, it provides clarity, not constraint, on making hard decisions. And I think earlier you were sort of signposting. I think you talked about, culture seen as fluffy. People make this massive assumption that when you do cultural interventions, it's all about lovely conversations and everyone feels good. When culture really plays into the commercial advantage of an organisation, people are making really tough decisions, are having really hard conversations, because they have the confidence because this is how we do things around here. And
you reminded me of a conversation with a leader this week, who's new into role, and thinking about their mark with a leader who's moved onto a board position, but in a non-executive capacity. The question I asked, well, how will decision making change under your leadership? What will be different, and what's and the essence? That's strategy, but it's also culture, isn't it? It's the coming together of those things. Perhaps we could just leverage on some of your learning experience, of your 7 years in Telos and beyond, about culture. When organisations are facing into those things that you've talked about, talent, performance, risk, potential, decision making, grit, competitive advantage, and seeing culture as part of the solution, where do you think, using the language used earlier in terms of helping and hindering, where do you see organisations, I guess, getting it more right so it helps, and where do you see organisations perhaps tripping up on themselves and where culture hinders?
So, Guy, steer me a bit where I need to be steered on this, because I might come across as too generic, but I think it all boils down to, what is your intent, and what's your desired outcome? Like, what's the destination? Because let me unpack those a bit. it goes back to the comments about, you know, the limitations of just relying on a task of articulating your values and your purpose and whatever other elements you use to define who you are and how you do things around here, right?
Yeah.
Because if your intent is driven by, oh, our competitors are doing this, so we just need to catch up, then that's limiting. Let's put it that way. It's limiting because
we need to tick a box because the regulators told us we need to improve in that area.
Yeah. And I think that's going to increase because all sorts of regulators have clocked onto how important culture is, and so it is a component in the guidelines, no matter whether it's guidelines or stipulated. So you've got to move away from the words, and it's got to be linked to the survival of the business. No, this is not a nice to have. This is fundamental. And forgive me for going into a bit of culture strategy, but what you're trying to do is take the very best bits of the organisation and amplify it for the market to go, oh yeah, I want to choose them. So it's not a task, it's a journey.
Yeah.
And it's gonna go wrong. And then in that moment, because it's all about moments accumulating into a story, and in those moments where it goes wrong, we use the culture to steer ourselves back on course, or go, oh gosh, that didn't work out and that wasn't part of our culture. How are we going to correct that? So that's a little bit of the intent. I'll talk a little bit to destination, and then you can tell me if we should go a bit deeper. And they're not mutually exclusive points, right? So I think sometimes people, again, an example would be words. I think there's a fixation on the output, whether it's the definition, whether it's even this sort of desire to get to the perfect culture. And there are tools out there that will imply this is the healthiest, we talked about mature. Here's the definition of a mature culture.
Yeah.
Here's the definition of an immature culture. Here's the definition of a healthy culture. Here's the definition of an unhealthy culture. Life is
they're almost doctrines, though, aren't they?
Yeah,
in that sense, as opposed to real life.
To be tested, but I'd really love if somebody was to go around asking our clients, I'd like to think a theme that runs through is a pragmatism. Like you've got to discover what you've got and make the most of it, rather than try and fit yourself into these boxes over here. It's got to be authentic to who you are, and you're not starting from a blank page ever, because even if you're founding a business, you've got a founder or a group of founders who have some preferences, and they're going to define some expectations. So there's something around what's your destination? If it's about building resilience and growing against headwinds, is that the right term? Then, you know, it's understanding what we're going to input to be able to get to a better place. And so this is where I kind of want to finish on this point is people, when we emphasize the words and the beautiful posters and the wonderful pictures that we attach to the words to kind of automatically change our behavior, we forget all the stuff, all the change management in between, and critically the leader's role. And I think when it goes wrong, leaders delegate it to somebody else,
or even abdicate might be the case. That's an HR thing over there, and we'll do it in that space.
But where it works is when you see leaders in the moment compromising their power, their time, their money, or money of the business. Where they're spending money on this, they are changing the way they make decisions. They are publicly showing that they are empowering others, not just talking about it, that they're like letting go of some control. And that might even be, we're going to slow down this transformation because we know how important it is to get everybody on the same page before we start, is an example of that. It's the leader's input versus this sort of suddenly it's just going to turn into the desired culture that we wrote up in a workshop.
Excellent. That's great. I'm picking up intent, destination, and accountability of leadership and the executive team in that collectively, as opposed to having it sat in one part of that, people and culture or HR or something like that. That's a real kind of woven into the fabric of how we operate as a leadership team.
And the next level, if it's helpful, is that yes, leaders are accountable, but then there's this wonderful mix of ownership spreading across the organization. So it's not just about the leaders doing it, but it is a wonderful balance of leaders letting go of some things and allowing other teams in the organization to contribute, and that's how you scale it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking of some really great examples that that might be live at the moment, but one of those, particularly a conversation I had with someone today where insert word that means part of their culture is part of their unique right to win. If I put the word in, it would give away the game of who it was. But yeah, so but there's a real conviction from leadership there to actually to make it part of our competitive advantage and to make sure that everyone has the shared clarity and conviction to making that real. But also acknowledging we are human, we're learning organisations, so it's not the doctrine, forgive me Father for I have sinned. It's the how do we make this part of our daily conversation in a continuous improvement mindset. I mean, obviously there's a lot going on in the outside world at the moment, as our inquiry it would have shown into volatility, Jo, and turning on the news every day at the moment, you're not sure what you're going to expect. How is that having an influence on organisations and their culture and the work that they're having to do on culture at the moment?
My most truthful answer is I don't know, because I've never literally not done a whole sample of how people are reacting. But let me answer. Let me have a go at sharing some of my perspective, and then we can, again, you can steer me if I need to have another go answering the question. That if we look, I think if we were to, you could actually answer this through those lenses of why culture is so important. So, for example, let's take how important culture plays a role in managing risk. The channels that are available to us now and the speed at which data can come at us means you've got increasing risk of reputation if you're not clear on how we do things in any particular organization. So that kind of relentless pace and availability and circulation of information, from my perspective, there's an urgency and a heightened awareness of how important we need to look after this stuff, right? The skeptic in me, I'm going to say skeptic, not cynic, is that because of that pace, that there can be a tendency to deprioritize some of the more complex human elements of a change effort. And so it's much quicker to write a strategy plan without engaging voices across an organization and then assume that that's going to direct the business, than to slow things down and ask people across the organization what's working, what's not working. And then trying to dissect what parts of the culture, how much of that is operational, how much of that is cultural.
We've just got to focus on this quarter's results.
So client, the truth, it is clients like, not now. We can't spend. Consultancy is often deemed as a discretionary thing. And I've been talking to an FMCG, a head of people in an FMCG business for 18 months, and it's we've got to cut costs. We can't justify having any help on this right now. So there's a dependency on their internal capability. Then there are, one or two clients that, when I say on the other side, like they've commissioned work, we've worked with them. They're on the other side of that. We know that we actually have suboptimal output when we don't involve external insights, consultants, whatever that grit is. They realize that they need it to be able to unknot where they are now. But
because if you're not dealing with it in that moment or addressing it, you have to address it later. So like you say, it's easy to write a strategy. It's easy to say we need a 10% reduction in headcount, and not be cognizant of the impact that has on culture and and talent and competitive advantage and all those sorts of things. So how people go through those pressure situations is almost as much a test of their culture as it is, in good times.
I think there's two parts of my hesitation. One is, I know that I'm coming from a consultant perspective in my answer, not a client perspective. And that's a lovely challenge, because the more we can help them see the return on investment, the easier it is for them to overcome some of these real challenges of not right now, I can't justify it. But then I think if we just take ourselves as individuals, I think we've got also, I just certainly do, have loads of examples of where I've gone, not now, I haven't got time for that. And yet, when I've slowed things down and I've tested some assumptions with others, or I've been open enough to hear a challenging question from, I'm immediately better off for it. So I suppose back to your original question, the world is demanding us to work faster. Some may interpret the power of AI to be an excuse to get rid of humans, but I think there's a real opportunity in organizations to do both, to slow down, to speed up, to use AI to help their people. I think clients who are getting it right. I was in a conversation on Wednesday with a team of clinical heads, and they were experiencing the shift in their own perceptions of AI, and they were ready to go out to their teams and say, no, we're not cost cutting. We want to make sure your role, the work that you do, is so much more enjoyable, so much more meaningful, and we want to take out all the stuff that gets in the way of that with AI. So have I answered your question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you answered it. What we're really saying here, I think, Jo, is, the culture is this integral, ever-present thing. It's not sticky plasters or initiatives that, we need to do workplace well-being type initiative, because fundamentally the way in which we work is wrong and harming people. It's far better to address that bit than put on the initiative. And that's present at in good times and bad, is it not? But it's so have and as you were talking, I was thinking of a conversation I had today with someone bringing their leadership team together in a few weeks' time. The last 2 years have been really tough and hard. We've had to make a lot of difficult, challenging decisions in the business. I think morale and energy has suffered as a result, and we need to recognise our role in that as leaders. So can you help us give something that allows us to step back, take stock, think about resilience, think about morale, think about leadership? And in thinking about that, people, you can't help but ask the question, well, what is the purpose of the organisation? What are the values? What are the behaviours? And how can you lean on those at this point in time to help you through that tough patch?
Yeah. And the bit that I'm not sure if I've been explicit enough, but is the timing, right? Because you can make very sensible decisions for short-term objectives, but to your point about purpose, that lifts the agenda to not always timeless, but that lifts the agenda to hang on. How can we be talking to each other? How can we be engaging with this customer? How can we be managing this challenge so that it makes sense for us 5 years from now? Yeah. It's setting a trajectory which is far more purpose driven, because that's the anchor that gets us through some of the crappy stuff.
Yeah, this is a difficult point in time, but how might we come out of this stronger? That question, brilliant. I think that's been a really helpful kind of exploration, Jo. I'm sure we could spend the whole day talking about this, but final question to you, really. If a leader was coming up to you, saying, "Oh, we need to do something about our culture," what's the key bit of advice or question that you would ask of them, to if they're thinking of that, I need to do something about the culture of my team and my organisation?
Because we take a discovery approach rather than this is the outcome you want to get to. And I know we haven't unpacked that, but I mean, one organisation will be driven by this desire to learn, and another organisation will be driven by a desire for excellence. Now, there could be a relationship there, but the language is really important to them. So I like to think I would be leaning on a question like, what have you got? What have you got? What have you got already? Because if there's something going really, really wrong, that will open up the conversation to a little bit about the aspirations, a little bit about the heritage. And in there will be something constant, which is really important for the future solution. And if it's something that if they're coming from a place of celebration and success, then it's helping them to identify what are some of those nuggets that they need to look after and scale, because it can move them from one event to a journey of progression and greater performance. So it'd be, what have you got already? Oh, and then also in a merger situation or an acquisition situation, that classic due diligence piece, which is, well, what's the opportunity there? Like, where have you got some like-mindedness, and where have you got some tension, which could not necessarily be a bad thing, but could support progress. So what have you got that we need to amplify?
Excellent. I think that's great advice. A kind of a growth mindset approach to culture almost there, in terms of what have we got, how do we amplify it, and if we have got some gaps, how do we start to move towards closing those over time?
Because ultimately, beyond the mechanics of culture strategy, what you're looking for is energy. It's whether it's, you call it fuel or momentum, you're looking for energy. Like, how can we energize the strategy? How can we energize this massive upgrade of infrastructure or massive scale of people that are going to be in our business or product portfolio. It's how are we going to, what energy can we generate authentically?
Fabulous, Jo. I think that's a fantastic place to leave it. Thank you very much for your time.